And if you would, then would you introduce our speaker this evening, since you know her very well?
Well, I don't know about very well. I've just known her a long time because she has been my hero for at least 20 years. Um, I forget who you were working for, Rita, when I first met you, but she's the ultimate environmental warrior, and she now keeps us. I don't know how you do it, because year after year is the victories are very small, and really we make a big deal out of it to keep the enthusiasm up. But um, there's so many ways that well, so many battles that are lost, that are just a horrible shame. I don't know how you keep your spirits up, Rita, but you are really a person to be admired and imitated as much as I can. You are my hero. Um,
Thank you.
as far as um, Rita, anything you want to share with us about your job, and how you, whether you still, how you keep your spirits up day in and day out?
Okay. So everybody, I work for Public Citizen. I've worked for Public Citizen as their North Texas representative since 2009. So 15 years. I've been on the board of the Lone Star chapter of Sierra Club, the chair of the Dallas Sierra Club. I've been a national facilitator for Sierra Club on a program across the country. I've worked for Clean Water Action for a number of years. I worked for Public Citizen and Clean Water Action at the same time, part of the time. So I started just like all of you as a volunteer I started in the 90s. And after jumping into things like cement kilns in 1995 with a permit fight on that, I've worked on permit fights against coal plants, C&D landfills, land farms, a whole bunch of stuff. And over time, some of the folks I worked with said, Rita, why don't you stop doing this as a volunteer and just be a staffer? Because my real background is graphics and marketing. And so I said, okay. So I've been doing it for a long, long time. And as far as what Grace said, yeah, Texas is probably one of the toughest states to work in. I'm sure that doesn't shock anybody. But you take your incremental wins where you get them. And like I was saying to some of you at the beginning, when we were all just hanging out on this call, you know, a lot of times we're more busy killing bad bills than getting our bills passed. We're trying to do what we can to protect the environment. And I work in a bipartisan way. And like I said to some people earlier, I also work on property rights and eminent domain because of my pipeline experience with the Keystone XL pipeline in East Texas, where I came to learn how unfair eminent domain is, especially for rural people. And I started an organization called Texas Landowners for Eminent Domain Reform. So with that said, I know I was here a number of months ago and we talked about the last session. I'm going to review just a few things from last session on this presentation, but I also want to bring to your attention the interim hearings. Interim hearings happen after a session ends. So after 2023 and after all those special sessions about school choice, basically, and especially during this past summer, there are what we call interim hearings, where Lieutenant Governor Patrick will put, or Phelan will put forward interim charges of things they want studied or brought forward in hearing. And interim hearings can be a big, can tell the future, so to speak, of what bills might or might not come forward in the next session. And we're going to discuss some of those topics brought up in the interim hearings, which I can tell by the reactions in those special hearings that there will definitely be legislation on certain topics. And the chairs of those respective Senate and House committees have definitely stated they intend to file bills. So with that said, let's go to the next slide. So we're going to take a global view of last session. As all of you know, private school vouchers were the big thing last session. And Governor Abbott really wanted these school vouchers to pass. They had several special sessions trying to get it passed, and it didn't happen. And unfortunately, those school vouchers were tied to teacher pay and student allotments. And I'm sure most of you have seen on the news, a lot of schools, they're closing schools, combining schools, etc. There has not been teacher pay raises since 2019. And so Abbott was using that as leverage. And we expect Governor Abbott to go full throttle on school vouchers again. And actually, he targeted certain House and Senate members who did not go along with him on the school vouchers. And he actually gained at least 7 seats, if not more, in that respect, which will turn into votes for school vouchers. Another topic that comes up, that came up last session, as you know, there's been lots of bills filed regarding elections, a lot of controversy around, are we having non-citizens vote, etc. For some reason, the legislature has a certain affinity for going after Harris County on all sorts of levels. And so Harris County was targeted on election bills. There were also bills regarding trans kids. There were attacks on local control. I'll bring up that bill in a second because I know Grace wanted me to give you all an update on House Bill 2126 is something I worked on. There were bills to prop up the oil and gas industry. As all of you know, last fall, we all voted on a proposition for creating the Texas Energy Fund, which was $1 billion to help get more natural gas power plants built. That was a big agenda of Governor Abbott's and Lieutenant Governor Patrick's as well. That passed, and I'll give you an update on that in a minute. There was also a fund to, and I've already said about the natural gas plants, but why they were doing that, there were all sorts of bills that were trying to make the establishment of renewables harder, like certain notifications to the county judge that you couldn't build a wind turbine within X amount of feet of a fence line, that if you were not close to a main transmission line as a renewable, you were going to have to pay more for those, for your distribution to be connected, and all sorts of bills like that. And I look for those to happen again. There was, this is the good thing that happened last session. The Centennial Fund got established for creating more state parks. And that fund you also got to vote on last fall, and that passed. And so there was a lot of funding created for for state parks in light of, especially you all heard about the debacle with Fairfield Lake and the developer who had bought that land from TXU. And that was a partial impetus for the state park fund, because the state does lease a lot of land from certain entities for state parks, and they have established a lot of infrastructure on those leased lands. And it has more than occurred to the legislature that they need to ensure that those lands are purchased so all that infrastructure is not lost. So the other thing that happened last session were some of the agencies that we care about the most were reviewed. The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality was reviewed, the Public Utility Commission, ERCOT, and the Texas Water Development Board, the agency that looks after water supply. Okay, so next slide. So just let's start with a few good bills that passed. So some of you are familiar with the Texas Emissions Reduction Plan, which basically has to deal with vehicle emissions, and that program's been funded for years. Well, this past session rather, they decided to include hydrogen fueled trucks and wanted to extend that funding to reduce oil and gas emissions. Even though that we haven't accomplished everything we wanted with the Texas Emissions Reduction Plan, at least this is a good project toward cleaning up emissions. So that bill was pretty good. Now, SB 8, which is something you all voted on last fall and all those propositions, established a $1 billion water fund to help with various problems across the state: flooding, clean water, and areas economically distressed that can't update their leaking pipes or get a new water treatment plant, or they're just too small and don't have the tax base by which to do infrastructure improvements. That bill was from Senator Perry, who's up in the Panhandle, and we're going to talk about that bill and what's coming in a minute. Another bill, all of us have tried to get reforms on the State Environmental Agency for years. And the sunset bill, every agency is up for sunset every 7 to 10 years. And the TCEQ, and what happens under sunset is an agency is under review. It can be abolished. It can be rolled into another agency. But most of the time, agencies are looked at, their funding's looked at for where maybe there could be improvement, some general things about permitting in the TCEQ case, because they permit power plants, landfills, anything that produces emissions for land, air, and water. That's what TCEQ does. So a sunset bill is filed for a particular agency when it's under sunset. And some good things came out of the TCEQ sunset bill this year, some that we have been trying to get done from the environmental community standpoint for years. All permits for any kind of facility are going to have to be published online. They're going to have to extend the comment period after a public meeting or hearing rather to 36 hours, because often communities barely get notice that an entity has asked for a permit from the state. It would require your state rep or your state senator to be notified if a facility is to be built within their district. It's going to add, it added $3.5 million for more air monitoring around the state. And it increased the penalty cap for industry in violations from $25,000 to $40,000 a day. That had not been updated since 1986. That's how old the penalty caps were. Now, Senate Bill 1648 is something I referred to a minute ago. That's the Centennial Park Fund, which appropriated approximately $1 billion for buying state parkland. So that's one of the best things that came out of last session. And then lastly, there was a bill by Senator Schwartner of Georgetown, which increased the penalties for market abuse in the ERCOT system from $25,000 to $1 million for penalty. That came out of the Storm Uri and all the market manipulation that was suspected at the time. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about the bad bills that passed, and then we'll go to the interim hearings. So next slide. Here we are. Okay. So one of the bills that we really didn't like that passed by Representative Hunter of Corpus Christi was the revising of what we call Chapter 313. It is a program that gives millions in school abatements. Now, this program was originally designed so that communities could entice brand new businesses to their towns and cities. But what ended up happening were existing oil and gas companies, chemical plants, plastic plants, and other industries took advantage that were already here in Texas, already in their respective towns. They applied and actually got those grants. Unfortunately, that program was supposed to go away. It had expired last session, and it was renewed and actually made it easier for existing companies to apply. So that was a huge disappointment. Many of us fought against it, and unfortunately it passed. Another bill was HB 33 by Chairman Landgraf of the Environmental Regulation Committee. And this bill would disallow state agencies to hire any third party toward the enforcement of a federal rule. Now, I will tell you the impetus for this is because the Fed and the EPA are passing new methane rules that will require monitoring of every oil and gas site. And because oil and gas companies aren't in the business of doing monitoring, or our state agencies, as you know, don't have enough people like TCEQ to do inspection, and neither does the Railroad Commission. If they wanted to hire third parties to comply with the federal methane rules, which are now under suit, that won't surprise you. It is to deny those agencies from contracting with outside parties to get the job done. It's quite unfortunate because the methane rules could make a huge difference in this state. I know all of you have seen the venting and flaring when you go down the road by oil and gas. A bill that many of you heard about in 2023 was HB 2127 by Dustin Burrows. And this was called the Death Star bill last session. It would basically disallow cities a lot of local control on a lot of ordinances. It would affect whether pet shops get dogs and cats, dogs from puppy mills. It would disallow cities from reining in payday lenders that prey on poor and disadvantaged populations. It even had the Sheriff's Association coming in saying, this bill will make it hard for us to hire policemen. Basically, this bill would take a lot of local control away from cities on practically everything but public safety. Even on sex shops, you couldn't regulate their hours as a city. So this was a big deal last session. The city of Houston was our champion on this bill, and they filed suit against the state, saying this bill was unconstitutional. And I worked this bill last session, and the good news is no cities have been sued over their local ordinances. Also, where this lawsuit is right now is at the Third Court of Appeals. They have not had a hearing. I stay in close contact with the Houston Assistant Attorney, Colleen Petty, and I talk to her every couple months to see if this lawsuit is moving. And I have a feeling it won't move till after the elections. We shall see. But no lawsuits have been filed. No lawsuits have been filed against particular cities for any ordinances. And some of you are probably aware Dallas had proposed to do something about gas-powered lawn equipment. There was a bill passed negating a local ordinance on that. There was a bill proposed about we're going to make everybody tear up their kitchens and get rid of their gas stoves. That was never going to happen, but somebody filed a bill on it anyway. And that happens down at the Capitol, just like bills on secession get filed every session. Some of it is kind of entertaining. Birdwell's bill, Senator Birdwell from Granbury filed the bill on regulating an engine source or an energy source or engine. That was toward Dallas on their lawn equipment. And then one of the worst bills last session was Senate Bill 471 by Senator Springer, who is retiring to my delight. Senator Springer filed a bill that if you complained to the TCEQ too many times, he was going to have you get fined for it. Then the bill pivoted to be, if you filed at least 5 complaints, the TCEQ could ignore you. Now, think about this. If you had something blow up in your backyard that was a company's, let's say, kiln operation, you would probably not be the only one to call TCEQ and tell them that some catastrophe has happened in your backyard. Or you might call TCEQ if they never came out and did an inspection on a concrete backsplat in your backyard that was violating the law or anything else. This bill is a giant disservice to the citizens of Texas, because you and I know, first of all, TCEQ doesn't have enough inspectors. They don't do enough enforcement, and this will put citizens living next to industry at a disadvantage on having their voices heard and the violations they see remedied. So that is one of the worst bills of session that Governor Abbott signed. Next slide. So let's get into next session. Yes, I'm sure some of you have already heard about the politics of next session. There is a big divide at the Capitol between Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Patrick on one side, and Speaker Phelan in the House on the other side. You may have read that the Lieutenant Governor actively campaigned for Phelan's opponent. Phelan comes from Beaumont, basically. And there is talk, and has been talk before, about if you have a Republican-controlled House, that there should only be Republican chairs. Though the tradition at the Capitol has been that there would be Democrat and Republican chairs every session to at least have the spirit of bipartisanship there. There are those in the Freedom Caucus that want only Republican chairs. And in the last few weeks, you may have heard Representative David Cook's name come up. A number of Republicans have coalesced around Representative Cook, who's only been in the legislature a few years. He's from Mansfield. There were 4 or 5 candidates running for speaker. So let me just say this. Whoever is the speaker gets to appoint, whether you're in the Senate or the House, who the chair of committees. And what happens with that is this. Whoever chairs a committee, and some of those committees we care about the most are the Natural Resource Committee, the Environmental Regulation Committee, the Business and Commerce Committee, et cetera, because they often have to deal with industry regulations. If the chair of a committee doesn't want to hear a bill, he won't put it on the docket. And that bill may not get a hearing at all. I will tell you, for instance, climate bills have been offered up the last 3 sessions. They have never, underscore never, gotten a hearing the last 3 sessions. Another big topic last session was concrete batch plants and quarries. The chair of environmental regulation did not allow one of those bills to take a final vote, and he didn't even allow a hearing till it was too late to move out of committee and toward the House floor. So that is how powerful a committee chair is. And that's why we are hoping that whoever gets Speaker of the House will be somebody who will work in a bipartisan way in that respect. Next slide. So we're going to go to the interim hearings, mostly of what happened that happened this past summer. The first was a topic of several interim hearings, and that was the grid and the new energy fund. And I'll just remind everybody, the energy fund is that fund that dedicated money toward building new natural gas power plants. Unfortunately, renewables were excluded from being able to apply for the money. There were bills passed last session to weatherize the grid, to make electricity more reliable, to make sure there wasn't market manipulation, et cetera. There were probably at least 8 bills passed around energy. So there were interim hearings to ask ERCOT and the PUC how that was all going. And because so much was asked of these agencies, they probably are not going to have it all figured out till 2026, which wasn't very exciting for the Business and Commerce Committee. They want things to move faster, and this is why. And I'll go to this next topic, because it's been a topic around our area as of late, and that's Bitcoin mining and data centers. Some of you may be aware that there's a big Bitcoin mining operation down near Corsicana, and they are popping up like rabbits around the state, along with data centers. Some of you may have heard that recently there's a data center proposed, I believe it's between Red Oak and Midlothian. There's one proposed near Fort Worth. And these things bring, not only do they use a lot of electricity, but they bring a lot of noise and vibration and are very disruptive to the people who live near them. I took notes on this hearing, and I want to give you some examples. But first, let me back up. I forgot to say something about the grid earlier. The new energy fund, I'm going to go back to that for a minute because it plays into the Bitcoin. The new energy fund, just to give everyone an update, is $5 billion. It had 125 applications to build new natural gas plants. 17 were selected for final review, meaning somebody's got to check and make sure the companies, the last 17, are viable and that, in fact, they're worthy of this money. Now, a week ago, and this plays into the Bitcoin thing, the PUC on the 26th of September approved the Permian Basin Reliability Plan to expand the power grid in West Texas to help the oil field, because they said it could grow 27, not megawatt, but gigawatts by 2038. That's almost 1/3 of the entire grid demand today. In other words, our grid's going to grow by 1/3. Well, some grid operators have also said that electric demand could double in a short amount of time. So there was a hearing about bit mining. And if you want to listen to it, it was June 12th in Business and Commerce. It's probably one of the better hearings to listen to for the summer. Bitcoin was put on the hot seat, and a company by the name of Riot, who built the Corsicana and Rockdale plants, testified. Now, if you didn't know, Bitcoin miners get paid to stand down during peak demand so that energy flows to the rest of us on the grid. His plants average 400 megawatts of power alone, what they use each. Now, your average power plant in Texas is probably 700 to 1,000 megawatts, okay? When he testified, his Rockdale plant is now 400 megawatts, but he said he would like to expand it up to 1 gigawatt. 1 gigawatt. That is tremendous. Then Senator Schwertner, who chairs Business and Commerce Committee, pulled up Riot, that's the name of the company, his SEC filings, and he said, you know, sir, you made $281 million last year. You got paid $71 million to sell power back to the grid. Guys, that's 1/4 of their profit was selling power back to our grid. And during summer at peak time, they made $27 million selling power back to the grid by simply shutting down the plant. During Uri, you know, that tremendous storm where people died, Riot made $125 million by shutting down and selling power back to the grid at prime energy per kilowatt prices. So just think of that. If you made 280 million last year, probably the 125 million was probably half the company's profits for the whole year. Now, remember I mentioned the Permian plan? Well, it turns out that it was somebody from ERCOT, I believe, testified that the Permian plan that was supposed to help oil and gas, that actually, you know, you have to let the state know if you're going to take on this kind of load, these big loads. It turns out that 60% of the load for the Permian reliability plan would be for bit mining, not for oil and gas. 5% would be for data centers. 22% is for developing hydrogen, because hydrogen's the up and coming thing in oil and gas. That leaves 13% for those in the oil and gas field that need more electrification. I'm going to quote Senator Nichols, who I know from East Texas, from Jacksonville. He got so animated during the hearing that he said, you know what? I think our system in Texas is being gamed. And he said this to the Bitcoin miner and owner during the hearing. And I'm just going to add this footnote to Bitcoin mining. And if someone wants the article, I'll send it to Grace. $119 million has been given to federal election campaigns just this year. Probably more than a lot of any other industry has been given toward the presidential, Senate, and congressional elections. So I have the article on that. Actually, Public Citizen did the research on that and would be happy to share it with you. Or if you get on citizen.org, you can read the article about those campaign contributions. So the other thing I want to say before I go to water is this. The thing about data centers, guys, is those absolutely have to run 24/7. They cannot shut down. They support hospitals, police, and other things, you know, Google, Microsoft, etc. It was also testified by the PUC and ERCOT that when you shut down as much as 400 megawatts and just drop it to the floor, it can actually cause damage to the grid system and transmission. So it's going to be interesting how this plays out, right? Because if we can't keep up with all this build out of data centers and Bitcoin, my concern is, as somebody living in this city or somebody who would live near those new data centers in Fort Worth or by Red Oak, what is going to happen when the next storm comes to residents if those data centers absolutely have to run 24/7? What is going to happen to the residents, the hospitals, the nursing homes that need power? It's something Public Citizen, I know we're going to be filing legislation on Bitcoin mining in the grid in that respect. So the next thing I want to bring up, and this hearing was just not too long ago, Senator Perry is the chair of Water, Ag, and Rural Affairs. And last session, he was the one who passed that great big bill I mentioned on water, HB 8, which was meant to help cities on flooding, clean water. If you're a small distressed community and you can't build infrastructure because you don't have a tax base for that, that is where that money was designed to go. I listened to the hearing that he had this summer, and there was talk about expanding water reuse in Texas. There was a hearing on boil water notices, which really is about Corpus Christi because they often have boil water notices. The big discussion this summer in his committee was about having a huge infrastructure bill next session on water supply. And again, I need to note this, the biggest regions, there's 16 water districts. We're in Region C. Senator Perry happens to be in Region O. Those are the two districts that want the most water supply out of the 16. Senator Perry, as you know, up in the Panhandle, they have all this, they grow cotton and they need irrigation for it, and they're running out of water. So I'm sure that's part of the impetus for this infrastructure bill. But his bill last session funded 68 projects for very small communities. And we are looking for him to file a huge infrastructure bill in the billions next session. Now, Senator Perry is looking for creative ways to get new water. I don't think they're the most cost efficient, like desalination. That can be an expensive proposition by how to get water. They're looking into trying to make produced water from oil and gas potable, which I think is going to be a huge challenge, because if anyone knows anything about fracking or produced water, there is a lot of chemicals that you would have to do something with in order to make it potable or reusable in a non-threatening way to land or populations. And I didn't hear this in the part of the hearing I listened to, but I also understand he's thinking about piping water from Louisiana. So stay tuned on that. It will be a big deal next session on water. Next slide. Now, the next topics on the next slide won't take much. Okay, let's talk concrete batch plants. A lot of you are aware of concrete batch plants as far as being an environmental nuisance, but they are concerning beyond that. They put out particulate matter, we call it PM. A lot of that dust we can breathe into our lungs, and it's not good for our health. There's carbon monoxide. There's a lot, and then there's the traffic and the nuisance of it. Often some of these concrete batch plants, despite the fact they're supposed to have certain kinds of hours associated to them, a lot of them operate outside the hours that they claim to be operating. A few of them in Dallas have been shut down because of that. One in Dallas was working without a permit for years, and TCEQ just let it go. So Sophronia Thompson, who is the longest serving woman in the Capitol, asked for a hearing on concrete batch plants down in Houston. And they had a hearing. There is no recording of the hearing. that in the usual sense of audio and visual, there may be something audio. But all the testimony was invited. None of the environmental groups got to testify. And I will tell you that I asked Cyrus Reed from Sierra Club and my boss, Adrian Shelley, who's long worked on concrete batch plants when he was with Airlines Houston, what the gist is of the concrete batch plant hearing. And basically, I believe this was Landgraf's hearing. It was like, oh, you know, Houston, they don't have any zoning. That's why all of this is a mess down in Houston. And we all know it's not a mess just in Houston. It's a mess for us in Dallas and a lot of, especially environmental justice communities where these are often placed. So I look for nothing to happen with concrete batch plants. If the chair of the committee is the same as last session, he will probably not allow these bills to move. Now let's talk about cement kilns. Lieutenant Governor Patrick has a great interest this summer, this year, in cement kilns. And as most of you know, a cement kiln is not a concrete batch plant. A cement kiln, not unlike the facilities in Midlothian, like Wholesome, like what TXI used to do, that Mark Marietta bought, used to burn hazardous waste to make cement, the component of concrete. None of them burn hazardous waste anymore from the 90s when I worked it. They burn natural gas. Some of them burn plastic, some of them burn tires. Well, Governor Patrick drew attention statewide for his concern over cement kilns and where they were sited, and this is why. The cement kiln in Grayson County that is proposed is near a little town called Dorchester, population 100. But very close to this, where this siting of this cement kiln would be are two semiconductor plants. One is TI's, another one is called Golden Wafer. Now, I don't know how familiar you all are with semiconductor plants, but some of their machinery is built with piers underneath it because it's such a delicate operation. You cannot have a lot of vibration or shaking. This cement kiln is supposed to be 600 acres and have a quarry next door, which means blasting. Now, supposedly, I believe the company's name is Blackwater, says they're not going to do any kind of significant blasting. Nonetheless, TI and Golden Wafer are very concerned because they had every intention of expanding their operations up near Sherman. So Senator Birdwell, who's the chair of Natural Resources, had a hearing about this. And if Governor Patrick wants a bill on something, there will be a bill. The challenge will be, how do you do a bill on siding in industry and make it narrow enough that it doesn't affect a lot of industry? For instance, if the bill was made too broad, it could stop all the fracking in Arlington if the bill was not tailored in a certain way. I actually texted that to my boss during the hearing, and then 5 minutes later, Senator Birdwell brought up fracking. So unfortunately, I don't think we could devise a bill that would do that. So stay tuned. There will be some kind of bill around this cement kiln that is now held up in Grayson County. It will be interesting to see how it develops. You should also know that besides the 2 semiconductor plants, a developer has plans for platting 20,000 homes up there, not 2,000, 20,000 homes. So you can imagine the juxtaposition of interest regarding this cement kiln. Lastly, I'll mention local control. Senator Betancourt chairs a committee that is Senator Betancourt from Houston is kind of known as a budget hawk, a tax hawk, et cetera, down at the Capitol. He had a hearing this summer regarding hotel taxes and transparency, which could be very concerning for our cities because you know of the revenue they get from hotel tax. He had another charge that was about the use of federal ARPA funds. And that was directed squarely at Houston once again. Apparently Houston was going to, through the ARPA funds, the American Rescue Act that the Biden administration put forward, was to put forward funding during COVID to help cities during that time period. And the city of Houston decided to do a program where by lottery, if you were a disadvantaged person, you could put your name in this pool of this lottery for only certain districts or areas of zip codes of Houston. And if your name was drawn, you were going to get, I believe the amount was $1,500 a month for X months. And Senator Betancourt was very concerned about that because he felt, why was there only certain zip codes selected? And he didn't think the lottery was fair. So since ARPA funds are pretty much over, I don't look for anything to be filed about ARPA because they're basically done. But I do think there may be more bills filed on local control, on hotel tax. And that could be disconcerting for all of our city's coffers. Okay, next slide. We're about done. So with that said, every session, there's sunset review. There are no major agencies under review like last session. The Texas Ethics Commission is up for review, and the Texas Real Estate Commission. Texas Ethics Commission has to do with reporting of campaign funds. Any of us who lobby and get paid by whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit have to register. I don't foresee anything changing there at either of those agencies. Next slide. So next session, the trends are, I look for more favors to the oil and gas industry, and there's going to be an emphasis on hydrogen fuel and CO2 pipelines. It came up last session, barely scratched the surface, but I believe that more will happen with that topic. There will be more bills going after renewables, and I think that will be the refiling of some of the bills, like a wind turbine can't be less than 1,000 feet from a fence line, and the county commissioners have to be notified, and et cetera, on transmission as well. I do definitely think there's going to be a rule on cement kilns because of what's happening in Grayson County, more attacks on local control. And because of everything I heard about Bitcoin mining and data centers causing a huge explosion of energy need, I think someone's probably going to offer a bill saying Bitcoin mines you're not going to get all this money for selling power back to the grid at a more inflated price than what you bought it for, shutting down and making all this money. Something's going to have to happen there. But right now, the capital doesn't even have a definition for what is a Bitcoin operation, what's a data center. So they're going to have to put those definitions in the bill. Last slide. Next slide. All right. Well, guys, stay tuned on what's going to happen next session. There's going to be a lot of talk about strain on the grid, and there's going to be probably more things coming on local control. If you want to watch some of the hearings I talked about, go to capital.texas.gov. A lot of us call it the TLO website or Texas Legislature Online. You can review any of these interim hearings. You can look up any of the bills from last session by word or by bill number. And as Grace knows, every session I have a regular, it usually starts in March, weekly or bi-weekly meeting about the good, the bad, and the ugly bills of session. And I will tell you where they're moving, if they're not moving, if they're dead, if we need action on them. And you can also always email me at rita.beving@gmail.com. So thanks, everybody. That's my presentation.
Mary,
Is there
you
any questions?
go through the questions?
Sure. Rita, there's a couple questions so far.
Uh-huh.
One's from Grace. She's saying a new data center on Sandy Lane near Lancaster, across from Rose Hill Cemetery, and sort of behind Hanley Feed Store is advertising for tenants. Do data centers get property tax rebates or other perks from the municipalities? And if so, for how long and why? They employ very few people, but consume a huge amount of energy and water for running and cooling the computers within. And is there hope that we, the enviros, could join with neighbors to try to keep them out of our towns? So there's a lot there.
Well, let me just say, I am not sure about the property tax rebates. As we know, it's not uncommon for municipalities, especially if you're a little bitty town, they would do this to draw industry to your town. And that's what that 313 program was supposed to do. But existing companies saying they're going to remodel or expand are actually applying for those. I think what we need to do as a community, because this is such an exploding industry, because like I know Senator Cruz came and touted the Red Oak Google data center that's going to be huge. I think we as an environmental community need to gather the information on these and present it to our city council and also ask them, is a data center going to get a priority over my house if we have a storm? What about, is it going to have priority over hospitals? Is it going to have priority over the police department? What is going to happen? Because they have to run 24/7. And they are actually supporting the data for hospitals and police stations. So I see a huge need to educate our council members, our county commissioners on this. I know Adrian, who I work with, has been out to Granbury lately. All the county commissioners that support Comanche Peak are super concerned about data centers and Bitcoin mining coming to their area. So people are starting to become aware of it. I will tell you, in the Business and Commerce meeting on June 12th, you can hear those senators thinking out loud that they're going, oh my gosh, we're talking of, like West Texas, 60% of the new demand in West Texas is all bit mining and data centers. We can't afford, we are second in the nation for data centers, and we're about to be first. And that's because all of them are coming here. And this, as far as the Bitcoin miners are concerned, what's not to like? You get paid for shutting down your plant and selling your power back to the grid at a much higher price than the low cost per kilowatt you contracted for. Wow, I wish I got paid for shutting down my business. So it's a huge concern, but I don't know about the property tax area of it.
Eric Pratt made a comment about the idea of penalizing Bitcoin is terrifying to me because the bill could be written to cover battery storage for doing the same thing. That would kill the possibility of a clean grid ever being built in Texas.
Eric has a good point. And I didn't bring this up, but Eric, I'm glad you brought it up. And Eric probably knows more about this than I do. I don't know why, but there are certain senators on Business and Commerce that I don't think understand battery storage and the benefit it gives to utilities and other areas. And I think that the best thing the North Texas Renewable Energy Group could do, and it's something I think our office needs to do, Cyrus Reed and Sierra Club needs to do, is we need to educate our senators and representatives about the potential for battery storage, what it really does, etc. It's sort of like water, right? Grace and I both know all the water utilities, what do they want to do? They want to build more reservoirs, right? They don't want to look at more energy reuse like they could, energy efficiency like they could for businesses on demand response, for electricity, or conserving water. It's like all of these guys want to build things, but we have to also understand who are doing the studies for these reservoirs. It's the very companies that get to build them, study them, do the pipeline for them. There's huge conflicts of interest in this, and there's too much emphasis on building things out. There are cities like, I said this in testifying on water yesterday, Dallas Water Utilities, average GPCD is 149. In the year 2000, when I started working Marvin Nichols, it was 254. Dallas Water Utilities, I live in Farmers Branch technically. We buy water from Dallas Water Utilities. You know when we're asked to conserve? Never. You know why? We are a customer city of Dallas Water Utilities. They only ask for volunteer measures to conserve water. I have a neighbor down the street who waters his lawn every day at noon. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. And so it's like the most pragmatic and some of the lowest cost ways of saving water, saving power, etc. Some folks just don't want to do it. They just want to build things, And then there's all the myths about renewables and runoff and on and on. We've got to do a better job of educating. And that's Eric's right. I don't think, Eric, they would write the bill that Birdwell is thinking, I don't think it would snag battery storage, but we do have to keep our eye on battery storage next session because people like some of the senators on Business and Commerce don't understand it. And I'd be happy to talk to you about that offline. So, and yes, Grace reminded me that GPCD, sorry for the acronym, is gallon per capita per day, or think of gallon per person per day. That's what that means. So.
And Eric also had made an announcement. Drive Electric Week events will be held in the area this weekend at University Christian Church on Saturday, 10 to noon. Tanger or Tanger outlets Sunday, 10 to 2. Both are free. Come get accurate information about EVs and electrified vehicles.
I've got a question for Eric. Who's sponsoring that? Is it Texetera or NT Reg or?
No, the University Christian Church is just holding it on their own as a
Oh, great.
event. And the Tanger Outlets is organized by the NCT COG.
Well, great. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Glad to hear it. And guys, speaking of electric, I talked to Susan Alvarez, who used to be with the environmental department for Dallas. And I think the state finally has released to COG where they're putting charging stations. We've all been wondering about it for years, at least two years. So, Eric, if you want information on that, you should get a hold of Susan Alvarez on the charging stations. Or Susan may be there, so she might be able to give it to you. So.
Okay.
Well, guys, I know that was a lot to go over. But you know, what I always say to people is we need to pay close attention to what happens at the State House, because often that can affect us more than what happens federally. And, you know, I started lobbying as a volunteer. You don't have to be an expert to tell a legislator you care about an issue. They've got so many issues to cover. They're not experts on all these topics. And I guarantee you, some of the folks on this call know a lot more than some of our senators and reps do about particular topics. So if you ever want to lobby at the legislature, we have lobby days. Sometimes a bunch of us do it together. The environmental groups have a coalition called the Alliance for Clean Texas. And once a lot of the legislation gets filed and it's moving, we have those lobby days. And if that interests you, get back to me and I will alert you to when those happen. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. If there's no other questions or anything, we will end the meeting and let Rita go and relax.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. You're always a great group to talk to. I hope I wasn't too confusing.
Oh, no, you were very clear.
Thank you.
All right.
Good. Really exciting. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Not too cheery, but in terms of the outlook, but we need to see everything what's going on.